Cursed Reflections, The Haunting of Whispering Lake. Whispering Lake lay nestled in a remote valley, its still waters reflecting the dense forest that surrounded it. By day, it was a picture of serene beauty, a hidden gem untouched by the modern world. But as dusk fell, a shroud of unease descended upon the lake, casting eerie shadows and whispers that sent chills down the spines of those who dared to linger. The villagers of Oakshade, who lived just beyond the forest, spoke in hushed tones of the lake's cursed reflections, believing that those who gazed into its depths at night would see more than their own visage. They would see the spirits of the damned, yearning to escape their watery prison. Chapter 1: The Arrival. Claire Weaver had always been drawn to the forgotten and the mysterious. As a freelance journalist with a penchant for the paranormal, she had traveled to many strange places, but none intrigued her more than the rumors surrounding Whispering Lake. It was late summer when she arrived in Oakshade, the small village that bordered the haunted lake. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the whispers of the past, and Claire felt a thrill of anticipation as she checked into the quaint little inn at the edge of town. "You're here about the lake, aren't you?" asked Mrs. Thorne, the innkeeper, her eyes narrowing as she handed Claire a worn brass key. Claire nodded. "I've heard the stories. I want to see for myself." Mrs. Thorne's face darkened. "Be careful, miss. Whispering Lake holds many secrets, and not all of them are kind." Chapter 2: The First Night. Claire spent her first day in Oakshade interviewing the locals, piecing together the fragments of the lake's dark history. She spoke with the town's elder, Mr. Harris, whose voice trembled as he recounted the eerie occurrences that had plagued the village for over a century. "People vanish, miss," he warned, "taken by the lake. And those who return are never the same." That night, armed with a flashlight and her notebook, Claire ventured into the forest. The path was narrow and winding, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. As she approached the lake, the air grew colder, and the whispers began, faint at first, then growing louder, an eerie chorus of voices overlapping in a language she couldn't understand. She stood at the water's edge, her flashlight casting a feeble beam across the inky surface. For a moment, she hesitated, the weight of the villagers' warnings heavy on her mind. Then, she knelt down and gazed into the lake. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and ghostly in the moonlight. But then, something shifted. Another face appeared beside hers, a young woman with hollow eyes and a look of indescribable sorrow. Claire stumbled back, her heart racing. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and she realized with a jolt that they were calling her name. Chapter 3: The Curse. Determined to uncover the truth, Claire delved deeper into the history of Whispering Lake. She learned of a tragic tale that dated back to the late 1800s. A young woman named Eliza Marlowe had drowned in the lake under mysterious circumstances, her body never recovered. Soon after, villagers began to report seeing her reflection in the water, her spirit trapped in seeking revenge. Her research led her to the town's archives, where she discovered a trove of old newspapers and letters. She uncovered a darker side to Eliza's story. She had been accused of witchcraft by the townspeople, her beauty and independence arousing suspicion and envy. Betrayed by those she trusted, Eliza was condemned without trial, and on a stormy night, she was dragged to the lake and thrown in. As she sank into the icy depths, she cursed the villagers, vowing that her spirit would never rest until her name was cleared. Claire's investigation led her to the old Marlowe mansion, now a decaying ruin hidden deep within the forest. The mansion was an imposing structure, its grandeur faded but still evident. As she explored the crumbling structure, she discovered Eliza's diary, its pages brittle with age but the words still legible. In her final, desperate entries, Eliza wrote of the injustice she had suffered and the curse she had placed on the lake, vowing that those who wronged her would be forever haunted by her spirit. Chapter 4: The Haunting. As the days passed, Claire found herself increasingly drawn to the lake, compelled to uncover its secrets. The visions in the water became more vivid, more terrifying. She saw glimpses of Eliza's tormentors, their faces twisted in agony, their souls trapped alongside hers. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, and Claire began to feel their pull even in her waking moments. She started having vivid nightmares, where she was drowning in the lake, Eliza's hands pulling her down into the darkness. Desperate for answers, she sought out the help of Marcus, a reclusive historian and occult expert living on the outskirts of Oakshade. Marcus was a tall, gaunt man with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. He had spent years studying the paranormal and had heard of the curse of Whispering Lake. "You're playing with forces you don't understand," Marcus warned as he sifted through old maps and documents. "The curse is real, and it's powerful. The only way to break it is to find Eliza's remains and give her a proper burial. It's the only way to bring peace to her tormented soul." Together, they scoured the forest and the lake's edge, following clues from Eliza's diary. They uncovered more details about the villagers who had condemned her, a group of influential men and women who had profited from her downfall. It became clear that Eliza's death was not just an act of superstition but a calculated move to seize her family's wealth and land. Chapter 5: The Reckoning. One stormy night, Claire and Marcus returned to the lake, certain they had found the spot where Eliza's body had been hidden. The wind howled through the trees, and the sky was illuminated by flashes of lightning. As they dug into the muddy earth, the whispers grew to a deafening roar, and the air around them crackled with a supernatural energy. Finally, they unearthed a skeletal hand, its fingers clutching a silver locket. With trembling hands, Claire opened the locket to find a small portrait of Eliza and a lock of her hair. As she held the locket, the ground beneath them trembled, and a ghostly figure rose from the lake, Eliza's spirit, free at last. She gazed at Claire with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow, then slowly faded into the night, taking the whispers with her. But it wasn't over. The spirits of Eliza's tormentors rose from the lake, their faces twisted in eternal torment. They reached out to Claire and Marcus, their hands clawing at the air. Marcus chanted an incantation from an ancient book, and with a blinding flash of light, the spirits were banished back into the depths of the lake. Whispering Lake returned to its tranquil state, its waters calm and still once more. The villagers of Oakshade, sensing that the curse had been lifted, began to speak more freely of the past, sharing their stories without fear. Claire, having fulfilled her quest, left Oakshade with a sense of closure and a newfound respect for the power of the unknown. Years later, she would look back on her time at Whispering Lake with a shiver, the memory of Eliza's sorrowful eyes etched forever in her mind. She had uncovered the truth and broken the curse, but she knew that the echoes of the past would always linger, just beneath the surface. Claire's article on Whispering Lake became a sensation, drawing attention to the small village and its dark history. Tourists flocked to Oakshade, eager to glimpse the haunted lake and hear the chilling tale of Eliza Marlowe. But Claire knew that some things were best left undisturbed. She never returned to Whispering Lake, content to let its secrets remain buried in the depths. And on quiet nights, when the wind rustled through the trees and the moon cast its pale light on the water, the villagers of Oakshade would still hear the faint whispers of the past, reminder that some curses can never truly be broken. Story 2. Whispering Lake had always been a place of serene beauty by day, its crystal-clear waters mirroring the surrounding pines and distant mountains. But as night fell, a sinister presence emerged, transforming the tranquil lake into a place of dread. The villagers of Ashwood, nestled a few miles away, spoke in hushed tones about the lake's cursed reflections, warning that those who dared to look into its depths at night would encounter something far more terrifying than their own image. Chapter 1: A New Beginning. Madeline Harper arrived in Ashwood with a sense of anticipation and curiosity. As a renowned photographer specializing in capturing haunted places, she had traveled far and wide. Yet, nothing intrigued her more than the stories of Whispering Lake. Renting a rustic cabin on the outskirts of the village, Madeline set out to document the lake's mysterious allure, hoping to uncover the truth behind the haunting tales. As she settled into her new home, Madeline visited the local market, where she met an elderly woman named Agatha. With her silver hair and piercing green eyes, Agatha seemed to carry the weight of many untold stories. "You're here for the lake, aren't you?" Agatha asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and caution. Madeline nodded. "I want to understand what's really out there." Agatha sighed. "Be careful, child. The lake has claimed many souls. Its reflections are cursed, and those who seek its secrets often find themselves lost." Chapter 2: The First Encounter. Eager to begin her project, Madeline spent her first day exploring the area around Whispering Lake. The forest was dense, with tall pines and tangled underbrush, creating a natural barrier that seemed to protect the lake from prying eyes. As dusk approached, she set up her camera and waited for the right moment to capture the lake's ethereal beauty. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the lake's surface became a dark mirror, reflecting the growing shadows of the forest. Madeline peered through her camera lens, adjusting the focus. Suddenly, she froze. In the reflection, she saw a figure standing at the water's edge, a young woman with long, flowing hair and a dress that seemed to shimmer in the fading light. Madeline lowered her camera, but the figure was gone. She felt a chill run down her spine and decided to call it a night. As she packed up her equipment, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Chapter 3: The Legend of Whispering Lake. Over the next few days, Madeline delved into the history of Whispering Lake. She visited the village library, where she found old newspaper clippings and dusty journals detailing the lake's dark past. According to legend, a tragic love story had given birth to the curse. In the early 1900s, a young woman named Evelyn Moore had fallen in love with a fisherman named Samuel. Their love was pure but forbidden, as Evelyn was promised to another man, a wealthy and influential figure in the village. Desperate to be together, Evelyn and Samuel planned to elope. But on the night of their escape, they were discovered. Evelyn's betrothed, consumed by rage and jealousy, confronted the lovers at Whispering Lake. In the ensuing struggle, Samuel was killed, and Evelyn, overcome with grief, threw herself into the lake, vowing to haunt the waters until she could reunite with her lost love. Since that fateful night, the lake had been cursed, its reflections revealing the tormented spirits of those who had perished there. Chapter 4: The Haunting Intensifies. Madeline's fascination with Whispering Lake grew, despite the increasingly disturbing experiences she encountered. Night after night, she returned to the lake, hoping to capture definitive proof of the haunting. Each time, the reflections grew more vivid and terrifying. One evening, as she reviewed her photographs in the cabin, she noticed something unsettling. In every image of the lake, the figure of Evelyn appeared closer, her eyes filled with sorrow and desperation. The whispers began to invade Madeline's thoughts, echoing through her mind even in the daylight hours. Determined to understand the curse, Madeline sought out Agatha again. The old woman revealed that she had once been friends with Evelyn and knew the true depth of her sorrow. "Evelyn's spirit is trapped," Agatha explained. She yearns for peace, but her grief binds her to the lake. Chapter 5, The Final Confrontation. Madeline realized that to break the curse, she needed to find a way to release Evelyn's spirit. She returned to the lake one last time, carrying a locket that Agatha had given her, a memento of Evelyn and Samuel's love. As she approached the water's edge, the air grew colder, and the whispers became a cacophony of voices. Holding the locket tightly, Madeline called out to Evelyn, begging her to show herself. The lake's surface began to ripple, and Evelyn's ghostly form emerged, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. Madeline stepped closer, extending the locket toward the spectral figure. "Evelyn, I know your pain," Madeline said softly. "But it's time to let go. Samuel would want you to find peace." Tears streamed down Evelyn's translucent cheeks as she reached for the locket. The moment her fingers touched it, a blinding light enveloped the lake. The whispers ceased, and the air grew still. Whispering Lake returned to its tranquil state, its waters calm and still once more. The villagers of Ashwood, sensing that the curse had been lifted, began to speak more freely of the past, sharing their stories without fear. Madeline, having fulfilled her quest, left Ashwood with a sense of closure and a newfound respect for the power of the unknown. Her photographs of Whispering Lake, now free from the haunting reflections, became famous, capturing the beauty and mystery of the place. Yet, she knew that the true story of Evelyn and Samuel would remain with her forever, a reminder of the power of love and the lingering echoes of the past. And on quiet nights, when the moon cast its pale light on the water, the villagers would sometimes hear the faint sound of laughter, as if the spirits of Evelyn and Samuel had finally found their way back to each other, their love shining brightly even in death. Story 3. Whispering Lake sat like a forgotten jewel in the heart of an ancient forest, its waters unnaturally still and clear. During the day, the lake was a picturesque scene, serene and inviting. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the lake transformed. A cold mist would rise from its depths, and eerie whispers would drift through the trees. The villagers of Blackwood, a small settlement on the lake's edge, believed the lake was cursed, haunted by malevolent spirits that ensnared the souls of those who gazed into its reflective surface after dark. Chapter 1, The Invitation. Dr. Eleanor Warren, a noted parapsychologist, had spent her career debunking myths and legends of the supernatural. Her skepticism was well known, yet she approached each case with a rigorous scientific method and an open mind. When she received an invitation from an old colleague, Dr. Richard Templeton, to investigate the strange occurrences at Whispering Lake, she couldn't resist the challenge. Richard's letter had been brief but compelling. "Eleanor, you must come. The lake is unlike anything I've ever encountered. The villagers are terrified, and there are too many coincidences to ignore. I fear there is a rational explanation, but it eludes me. I need your expertise." Arriving in Blackwood, Eleanor was struck by the pervasive sense of unease that hung over the village. The locals eyed her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, whispering among themselves as she passed. At the local inn, she met Richard, who looked more haggard and troubled than she remembered. "It's worse than I described," he said as they sat by the fireplace. "People are disappearing, and those who return are changed. They speak of visions in the water, reflections that aren't their own." Chapter 2, The First Investigation. Eleanor and Richard set up their equipment near the lake the following evening. Cameras, thermal sensors, and audio recorders were strategically placed around the shore, aiming to capture any anomalies. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and a thick fog rolled in from the lake, obscuring the opposite shore. Sitting by the water's edge, Eleanor and Richard listened to the recording devices. The silence was soon broken by faint whispers, barely audible yet unmistakably human. Eleanor strained to make out the words, but they were just beyond comprehension. She glanced at the lake, its surface a dark, perfect mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, and for a moment, she thought she saw another face beside her own, a gaunt, pale face with hollow eyes. She blinked, and the face was gone. "Did you see that?" she whispered to Richard. He nodded, his expression grim. It started. Chapter 3, The Vanishing. The next day, Eleanor interviewed the villagers, gathering accounts of their experiences with the lake. She met Margaret, a middle-aged woman whose son, Jacob, had disappeared 2 weeks earlier. Margaret's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her hands trembling as she spoke. "He was just a boy," she said, her voice breaking. "He loved the lake, loved to fish there with his father. But that night, he came back different. He spoke of seeing shadows in the water, faces that weren't his own. And then, he vanished. Just gone." Eleanor promised Margaret she would do everything in her power to find Jacob and uncover the truth. As she left Margaret's home, she couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was at work. Chapter 4, The Revelation. Eleanor's research led her to the village's oldest resident, Abigail, a frail woman with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. Abigail lived in a small, cluttered cottage filled with relics of the past. "Whispering Lake has always been cursed," Abigail said as she served Eleanor tea. "Long ago, before this village existed, a tribe lived by the lake. They revered it, believed it was a gateway to the spirit world. But something went wrong. A ritual, an invocation, no one knows for sure. The spirits became trapped, angry, and they've been seeking a way out ever since." Eleanor listened intently, piecing together the fragments of the story. The lake was a portal, a boundary between worlds. And somehow, the spirits were using the reflections to reach out, to pull the living into their realm. Chapter 5, The Descent. Determined to confront the source of the hauntings, Eleanor and Richard prepared for a final investigation. They gathered supplies and rituals suggested by Abigail to protect themselves. As they approached the lake at midnight, the air was thick with anticipation and fear. Standing at the water's edge, Eleanor held up a mirror, a suggestion from Abigail to reflect the spirit's own power back at them. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the surface of the lake began to ripple. Faces appeared in the water, twisted in anguish, reaching out as if to pull them in. Richard suddenly cried out, his face pale with terror. "Eleanor, look!" In the mirror, Eleanor saw not just the reflections of the spirits, but a portal opening beneath the surface of the lake, a swirling vortex of darkness. The spirits were trying to drag them through. Summoning all her courage, Eleanor chanted the protective incantation Abigail had taught her, holding the mirror steady. The spirits recoiled, their whispers turning to screams. The vortex began to close, the water stilling once more. Chapter 6, The Aftermath. When the sun rose, the lake was calm, its cursed reflections gone. The villagers of Blackwood began to emerge from their homes, cautiously approaching the lake. Margaret ran to Eleanor, tears streaming down her face. "Jacob," she cried, and there he was, stumbling out of the forest, disoriented but alive. The other missing villagers followed, returning one by one, freed from the lake's grip. Eleanor and Richard packed up their equipment, the weight of their experience heavy on their shoulders. They had faced the unknown and emerged victorious, but the memory of those tortured spirits would stay with them forever. Whispering Lake returned to its natural beauty, the whispers and reflections a distant memory. The villagers of Blackwood rebuilt their lives, grateful for the peace that had been restored. Eleanor's report on the investigation was published, becoming a landmark study in the field of paranormal research. Years later, Eleanor would reflect on her time at Whispering Lake with a mixture of pride and sadness. She had uncovered the truth, saved lives, and dispelled a curse that had plagued the village for generations. But she knew that some mysteries would always remain, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the next curious soul to venture too close. And on quiet nights, when the wind rustled through the trees and the moonlight shimmered on the water, the villagers would sometimes hear faint whispers, a reminder that the past never truly leaves us and that some curses can never be entirely broken.